Growth only occurs in a state of discomfort. Now think about the power of that phrase. Growth only occurs in a state of discomfort. I can unequivocally state I wouldn't be standing on this stage today without my uncomfortable, order-disrupting day 9 years ago. By the way, I'm not recommending you go get fired to see if it leads to a TED Talk, but when you feel discomfort hit, that means you've entered the complexity ring. Complexity is nothing more than changed order. But when your order is changed, outcomes are no longer predictable, and it's unpredictability that makes you uncomfortable. And while most times your visceral response to discomfort is not just no, but hell no, you can actually learn how empowering it is to consciously acknowledge discomfort, and then when appropriate, choose complexity over order. And I know seeking discomfort sounds odd, and not many people do it, but you have to learn to embrace it because it's the only environment where sustained or exponential growth can occur. Okay, to weave high growth complexity into the fabric of your lives, there are 3 primary ways it can be triggered. Complexity trigger number 1 is it can be forced upon you. When I got fired, I didn't have a chance to stay in order. Complexity was selected for me. And when this happens, how much you grow depends on how you respond to it. Now, I could have remained angry. I could have used it as an excuse. But what I actually learned is that I suck as an employee. And I'm much better off accepting the risks of running my own company. Complexity trigger number 2. Someone can help you get there. This is the role of parents, teachers, coaches, and bosses, because left on their own, people will consciously or subconsciously select the comfort of order. And they then need to be pushed into complexity in order to continue growing. My youngest daughter spent most of her high school life training to play tennis. And her coach was pretty familiar with our work on complexity and the growth rings. So I called him up one day to check on Maddie's progress, and I was able to phrase my question like this. I said, "Hey, Lee, how long has it been since Maddie's been pushed deep into complexity?" Lee's response, "Funny you'd ask, Bill. We got there yesterday. She broke down into tears on the tennis court." Well, knowing how tough my daughter is, and the fact that she never cries told me she was deep into complexity. But friends, this is where critical developmental decisions are made, because the old Bill, the pre-growth ring Bill, would have intervened and wanted to know what was making her so uncomfortable. Then I would have done everything I could to try and get her happy again. What I really would have been doing is removing the complexity and putting her in order. I actually would have been stifling her development. But the new post-growth ring Bill relished in his daughter's discomfort. And it was the coach's next words that told me everything I needed to hear. He said, "But Bill, I got to tell you, it took a heck of a lot more to get her to the limits of complexity this month than it did last month." Discomfort was causing her growth. Okay, but what if you're not lucky enough to live or work in a robust, high-growth environment? What if you're stuck in order, even worse, stagnation? Well, the great news is everyone can trigger complexity at any time. So complexity trigger number 3, trigger it yourself. Take a journey with me back to Montgomery, Alabama in the 1950s. Imagine, if you will, a young girl who's black, and she attends an all-black high school. And she takes a city bus to get there and home, which wasn't unusual in that era. And on March 2nd, 1955, she boards the bus to come home from school, and she sits near the back in the first row of seats where blacks were allowed to sit. And as the bus continues to fill with white people, there's eventually no more room in the front of the bus. And according to local law, she needed to move further back to create room for white people to sit. You see, Montgomery had an order in place that one followed led to a very predictable outcome: repression of people with little conflict. But 15-year-old Claudette Colvin had just spent the last month in high school studying Black history, and she was understandably fed up with the historic and existing atrocities. And so on this day, she decided she didn't like Montgomery's order. And by refusing to give up her seat, she sent a community, our laws, and our entire country into complexity. Yes, 9 months before Rosa Parks made her famous decision to stay put, it was a 15-year-old girl that was handcuffed, dragged from the bus, and taken to prison. It was Miss Colvin, not Rosa Parks, who first fought the law, and by the way, was also the star plaintiff to testify in the famous lawsuit that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. So, I use Claudette's actions not to heighten awareness of race issues, although that's not necessarily bad, but I use it as an example of every issue, of every situation in an ordered environment. It's a real and perfect example of complexity forcing people, our communities, and our courts into discomfort, and the downstream impact that can occur anytime someone elects to move from order.